and welcome to Fort Vancouver National Historic Site, located in beautiful Vancouver, Washington, and Oregon City, Oregon. My name is Megan Huff, and I am the museum curator here at this national park. Today, I'm at Vancouver Barracks, which is one of the oldest military posts in the Pacific Northwest, where we will talk about a woman who worked tirelessly to help her people and Native people who were imprisoned here. Paiute author and activist Sarah Winnemucca. Sarah was born around 1844 in what is now the state of Nevada. She was a Paiute woman, the daughter of Chief Winnemucca. From the time she was a young girl, Sarah and her family both witnessed and were the victims of acts of violence and injustice perpetrated on the Paiute people by the United States military, civilian settlers, and Indian agents charged with managing reservations. Sarah longed to help her people, and she recognized early on that language and communication were essential starting points to bringing about fair treatment. For many years, Sarah worked as an interpreter. As she later wrote, "My people are very reasonable and want to understand everything and be sure that there is fair play." Sarah interpreted for the Paiute at the Mahler Reservation in eastern Oregon until her protests against the corrupt Indian agent there forced her to leave. When Sarah first arrived here at Vancouver Barracks in November 1879, she had recently worked for General Oliver Otis Howard as a scout and interpreter during the war between the United States and the Bannock. Sarah had greatly impressed General Howard and the other Army officers with her loyalty, bravery, and skill. During the war, Sarah saw her work as part of an important effort to keep peace between the United States and the Paiute. General Howard was a famed Civil War general who was then serving as the commander of the Army's Department of the Columbia and living in this ornate home he had just built that year. Here, Sarah asked Howard to send help to the Paiute who had been sent to live on the Yakima Reservation in central Washington. Though many of the Paiute had cooperated with the military during the war with the Bannock, some had joined the Bannock's forces, and Sarah believed they were being unfairly punished. The Paiute had been forced to make the 350-mile journey from the Mahler Reservation to the Yakima Reservation in the middle of the previous winter, resulting in many deaths. Once they had arrived, they were forced to live without basic necessities, again at the mercy of an unsympathetic Indian agent. After this visit to Vancouver Barracks, Sarah needed to find a larger audience for her message. From here, she went to San Francisco, where she delivered a series of popular lectures on behalf of the Paiute. From San Francisco, she went to Washington, D.C. with her father and her brother, and there they met with the Secretary of the Interior and President Rutherford B. Hayes. However, despite the promises made by the U.S. government on that trip, the Paiute people living on the Yakima Reservation were still not given what they needed, a safe way back to their homelands. In 1881, when she was running low on funds, Sarah wrote to General Howard here and asked if he had a position for her. He asked her to come here and act as an interpreter for Native people who were imprisoned in the Vancouver Barracks guardhouse. Throughout the Indian Wars of the late 1800s, the guardhouse was used as a place to hold Native men, women, and children who had been taken prisoner. General Howard believed that keeping Native people imprisoned at the guardhouse, especially high-profile tribal members, could be used as an incentive to force the cooperation of tribal leaders who resisted removal to reservations. When Sarah arrived here in 1881, 13 men, 21 women, and 19 children were imprisoned at the guardhouse. Many were living in tents in the surrounding area in all weather. The guardhouse is no longer standing, but it would have been located about here. It faced this enormous garrison flagpole, a huge parade ground, and beyond that, Officers' Row and the post commander's residence. Soldiers who had broken Army laws or regulations were also held here. The guardhouse was in a highly visible location, and it was an important symbol of the Army's power and control here. For the people imprisoned at Vancouver Barracks in 1881, a group that included Sheep-Eater, Shoshone, Bannock, Paiute, Nez Perce, Snake, and Cayuse people, Sarah worked as an interpreter and also organized classes to teach the imprisoned children English. Imprisoned men were forced to make improvements to the army post. They whitewashed fences, made paths, built and improved roads, and, as General Howard later wrote, put the whole outer face of things in prime condition. One of these imprisoned men, however, took 2 others with him and escaped across the Columbia River and into Oregon. Sarah and a group of officers' wives offered imprisoned women lessons in sewing. Sunday school was also offered and may have taken place in the upstairs chapel of the guardhouse. General Howard later called the imprisonment of this group of Native people the most satisfactory operation, and called this period of imprisonment an opportunity to apply the processes of civilization. In March 1881, Sarah wrote a letter to the Secretary of the Interior on behalf of the imprisoned people at Vancouver Barracks, telling him that they needed better supplies and clothing and a proper place to live in. She asked that he give them some land in the area where she could teach them to farm, rather than relocating them to a reservation. While she was at Vancouver Barracks, President Hayes visited, and again Sarah had the opportunity to speak with him and First Lady Lucy Hayes. She told them about the suffering of the Paiute on the Yakima Reservation, and her story brought the First Lady to tears. But while President Hayes offered to look into the matter, again, no progress was made. By the end of 1881, Sarah's request to let the Native people imprisoned at Vancouver Barracks stay in Washington was denied, and she helped escort them to the Fort Hall Reservation in Idaho. Sarah went on to deliver hundreds of lectures in the eastern United States on behalf of the Paiute. In 1883, she published her autobiography, the first book of its kind written by a Native woman. Through Sarah's writing and lectures, the world learned about the experience of westward expansion from the perspective of the people who were already here when settlers moved in. She told the stories of Native women and children, stories that were often ignored, overlooked, or filtered by white writers. And through her speeches and writings, she argued against the Indian agency system that both manipulated and ignored her people. The stories she told were moving and pointed calls to action. At the end of her book, Life Among the Paiutes, there were instructions for readers to create a petition on behalf of the Paiutes, and even an address where they could send the signatures they had collected. Advocating for her people was Sarah Winnemucca's life's work. As she herself said, "I am going to see my people dealt rightly by, and to stand by them, and I am going to talk for them just as long as I live. I am here to work for my people, and I am going to my work." Thank you so much for joining me on this virtual trip to Fort Vancouver, and we hope to see you here in person soon.